I came back from a vacation 2 days ago, and my 32 and 37 hour train rides respectively gave me an incredible ability to verbalize an idea that I have had floating around in my head for quite some time. Systems only work because people ignore the way they're supposed to work when an unfortunate situation arises. Let me explain this. On my journey to vacation, the very first train that I took, literally the first train that I took, was delayed by 10 minutes because of some bullshit, and that made me only just miss the connecting train. Now this is annoying and unfortunate, but if you travel within Germany, it's fine. You know, I just went to the office of the trains, and they gave me a stamp on my ticket saying you can just take any train to get to your destination, which is the same train. It runs in 2 hours. Problem is, at this point, there's a lot of other trains on my list also that I have booked, and they're Swiss and Italian trains. Legally, if I miss a German train, because the German train that took me to the train station where I was supposed to be making the connecting German train was too late, they basically have to let me board another German train to take me to my destination, because the contract states that they have to transport me from point A to point B, and if the classic standard itinerary that I paid for doesn't work out because of their fault and not mine, they still have to move me. But if at point B, which in this case very iconically is Basel in Switzerland, I miss a connecting train because of the German trains, the Swiss train carriers don't have to care, because they don't have a contract of bringing me from point A to point B within that same window. They're not in violation of any contracts, because the reason I was late to their train isn't because one of their trains was delayed. But I was told in Germany that there's this sort of silent agreement between European rail carriers that if somebody misses a train because the previous train from another country was late, they still let them travel as though it had been their own fault, because if you didn't do that, people wouldn't travel by train internationally anymore, and that would be bad for everyone. So after having spent the night in Basel and seeing a man get robbed there, I was still at one end of Switzerland when I should have been at the other end of Switzerland by that time, so I had to take the very first train that they offered, which was so much of a first train that the information office at the local train station in Basel hadn't opened yet. So technically, because nobody had stamped me, I was riding with an invalid ticket. I had a ticket for that route, it just wasn't the ticket for that train at that particular time. But because I had the slip from the German train company saying, look fam, very sorry, we were just late, I could show that to the conductor, and she was able to go, look, this isn't even remotely valid, you shouldn't be able to ride with this, but because of course you showed me this evidence that this isn't actually your fault in like an ethical, moral type way, just stay on here, hang out on the train. Actually, we go a station further towards your ultimate destination, so just stay on for that as well. Don't worry about it. That was very nice. A few hours later in Milan, that didn't work, and I had to purchase another ticket that was rather expensive and really sort of cracked open my budget for the holiday, which was, you know, rather tight to begin with. Apparently the silent agreement was a little too silent to be audible to the Italian train carriers, which, to be fair, they're used to a much louder tone of conversation, as I discovered. Hence why I probably won't be traveling internationally by rail much anymore. If they'd behaved like the Swiss ticket inspector, I probably still would do it, even after my much longer 37-hour trip home. You may not know this, but currently there are a series of strikes by train drivers in Germany, and of course, my journey back home fell on the exact day when I had to get from the south of Germany to the north of Germany, which is the long way to travel through Germany. That's the exact day when, of course, the strike happened, was that precise day when I had to make that huge journey. Not like a different day, but that one. Only a fraction of the trains were actually running, and the Deutsche Bahn did their best to get people as far to their destination or even completely to the destination with significant delays. And the way they did this was by telling everyone, look, just ignore the rules and get people where they need to go. They offered me a direct connection that wasn't even on my original route because I told them that there at that point in the middle of the country, I would be able to stay overnight and then take another train the next day. I didn't personally end up taking this option, but I would have had it even though it had nothing to do with my original ticket. It was an unfortunate situation, and everybody knew about it, so it required a little bit of discretion and flaunting of the rules. Any given system to organize or do anything with is designed to achieve a specific purpose, sometimes multiple different, potentially even competing purposes. And because there rarely is an ideal way to organize such a system, usually you can have very different systems to achieve the same purpose. If it's a big system, more likely that things will go wrong at different steps and points within the system. It's also very likely that one end of the system isn't communicating with the other end of the system. And what's certainly true is that no system can cover every potential eventuality, and even sometimes deliberately doesn't cover eventualities that occur rather often. Because if something becomes a rule in a system, in this case a kind of exception that helps you not have to adhere to certain rules, it immediately becomes ripe for exploitation. But of course, as the system designer, that is not your goal. What you want is to have a system that is as exploitation-proof as possible. That's part of the reason why you have a system in the first place. But what you want is for people to not get fucked over by your system. And in any given individual situation, because all of these are very individual situations, that decision will come down to a judgment call made by someone not particularly high up the totem pole who needs to feel secure that cutting someone some slack and making sure they don't get fucked over by the big system won't bite them in the ass. In Italy, somebody told me that Italian police, specifically their military police, actually takes courses in discretion. Now, this is something that most law enforcement officers in most places do. Like, for instance, weed is illegal in Germany, and if you're smoking weed, you're probably also carrying weed. But if you don't blow smoke in the face of a cop, they won't really give a shit most of the time. But this is the first time I personally had heard of police being trained in how to make judgment calls with the premise of, look, we have a lot of laws, and it's your job to enforce those laws, but if you enforce all of those laws all of the time, society wouldn't work. Now you may say, oh no, this invites corruption, and to be fair, that is certainly not wrong. But I feel like there's a minor difference between a cop looking the other way when there's like a car with one too many people and they clearly spotted, they've made eye contact with you. They know exactly what is going on, and they choose not to pursue it. And then there's the other side where there's like a special interest group like Big Pharma giving hundreds of thousands to a politician to heavily change legislation in a way that will get millions and tens of millions of people addicted to opiates. A little bit of friendly corruption between friends keeps the wheels greased, is what I'm trying to say. Every system requires a certain degree of personal discretion and an ability to skirt the rules every once in a while. This is true about those weird fucking screens at Macca's no one understands, it's true about when you're riding the train, and it's certainly true about the legal system. In fact, most societies these days have a whole caste of highly trained professionals where a big part of their job is to decide whether you should be cut some fucking slack. Judges are well within their rights to give lighter sentences to certain people in order to make sure that society works properly. And look, just because I know I've been talking about like judges and cops a lot, I very explicitly am not talking about the way that the situation in America is, maybe the way that it ought to be, but I am in full cognizance that these things are not working very well for y'all over there, so, you know. Don't think I forgot you. You cannot automate these things. You just cannot do it. Any system that involves humans needs to be able to adapt to those humans in their individual situations, their individual circumstances, and the individual playing out of the various different steps in the system and interfering factors. If your system cannot adapt to these things, your attempt to impose order upon the chaos will only result in more chaos. This even goes beyond when something goes wrong. This applies when you go to any fast food joint these days, and the first thing you have to do is figure out this. How do I get the thing that I want? There's just a big screen, and it has letters and numbers and pictures on it, but I know what I want. How do I make this happen? I was here last week, they changed it. Straight up, they changed it. Especially customer service people are getting automated away at an alarming rate, and those are really the last people you should replace with unthinking machines. In our daily lives, we are confronted with hundreds, maybe even thousands of various different individual systems that all work in different ways. Every website that you have, that you go to, every parking place that you move to, the supermarket that you enter, every app on your phone, they all have different systems as to how they work, and for the ones that you use frequently, probably you know how they work. The system run by machines needs very specific input to understand what it is supposed to do. It cannot handle any deviation from that specific input it requires, whereas humans, we love to be deviants. But you need to interact with systems that you're not familiar with every day, be that to file paperwork or to get Big Mac no fries. And I'm sorry, but most of those systems are unbelievably complicated, very specialized to a specific purpose that most people don't need to understand because that's not part of their daily life, and it is unreasonable to expect them to be able to navigate that shit. Luckily, there exists a sort of unified system that any human can use to interact with any other system. That system is called basic human communication, and it requires for there to be a person at the other end of the conversation that understands how this particular system works and what inputs it needs. So you can go there and say, look, the fried shrimp, I'm not really into cocktail sauce, but the screen just didn't have a box that I could tick for ranch dressing. Could you please put in ranch dressing? And then that person converts that to whatever input the system needs to work properly. It may not even be technically allowed within the system to put ranch dressing with the fucking fried shrimp, even though there is literally no negative consequence to this whatsoever. They cost the exact same price as a menu item. But skirting the rules in this case will make this individual customer come back at some point again. Maybe. Machines are just not capable of this kind of discretion. But the reason why the people who are in charge of these systems like machines so much is because they are able to achieve these very specific set out goals by the people who came up with the system in a predictable and quantifiable way. Usually the goal is profit, of course, and if you have machines that handle any aspect of the system, you will be able to have those machines enforce everything in an optimized way to get the maximum amount of profit. The problem is that that just isn't how reality works. Without the human element, aka people skirting the rules and exercising their own personal discretion at the ground level, the larger overall system wouldn't work. These big, complex, and elegant systems may look good in a boardroom presentation, but you cannot actually apply them to the sheer chaos of human civilization without a lot of people making a lot of little judgment calls. Also known as, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And I'm growing increasingly convinced that many of the people at the top of this whole pyramid have forgotten that this is the case, because if you look at these systems now, they're all designed for like maximum accountability, to find the people at the bottom of the pyramid who make the exceptions that make the system work and like hold them accountable, force them to work within the precise ramifications of the system, imposing the will of how they think reality ought to work over the uncaring reality of how reality actually works. In an increasingly organized world, we need to realize that just because we now have the technological ability to enforce specificity in every aspect of every system, doesn't mean we should do that. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. And in my last video, I asked for people on Patreon, and thank you so much. A bunch of people signed up. It's been giving me a good bit of security. I'm very grateful to all of you, so the slide at the end will look a little different this time. And yeah, basically, see you around, cunts.